So we're going to be talking about intergenerational therapy and psychoanalytic family therapy. There is some common roots with both psychoanalytic theory and systemic theory. Um, okay, compared to some other theories where maybe we don't focus as much on the past with intergenerational and psychoanalytic, and as you've learned with your Bowenian, your genograms and things of that nature, like we're going back to the past, right? We're looking at patterns. Or looking at how like cause and effect in the sense of like, be due to this person being this way, and this is how they raise their kids, and this is how you were raised, and these were the experiences you had. And not that that means that's who you are, but it does shape you. It shapes your parenting. It shapes decisions maybe you make. We talk about enmeshment and people being disengaged and all those kinds of things. So um and then we also then talk about how other things affect, right? Like divorce or addiction or death or things of that nature. So this is, again, we're getting with this kind of theory, we're going deeper into the roots of the tree, right? Um, so just some knowledge there, okay? So in a nutshell, this is what some information you need to know. The theory is more about the nature of being human than about families or family therapy. Therapy involves increasing the client's awareness of how current behavior is connected to multi-generational processes. That's what I was talking about. Hopefully from your papers, which I know were a bit stressful for everyone, and I know the prompt was a bit like vague. And just so you understand, I'm kind of like the tour guide of the course. I don't write the course. So I understand the vagueness, I can understand your frustrations with some of that. But hopefully through the process of completing that handout, doing your own personal genogram, you'll see how multi-generational processes are something that you can even identify from your own family of origin and see the patterns in certain circumstances. It can be a bit eye-opening and a bit shocking. This is the same as it would be for clients. They don't really necessarily see it. When you've been living it, you don't know. It's like when you travel out of our country, for those of you who have, and you go somewhere else, and maybe while you're swimming in your own fishbowl, you don't maybe necessarily like, oh, realize the water's murky or this or that. But then when you come back, now you see things a little bit different because you got out of the fishbowl. Sometimes clients have been swimming in their own murky water for a very long time. And so it's not until someone else kind of brings them out of the fishbowl that they're able to see like, oh, there's some things going on here that aren't so great. Okay. So again, differentiation, a person's ability to separate interpersonal and interpersonal distress. So intrapersonal separates thoughts from feelings in order to respond rather than react. Interpersonal, know where one self ends and another begins without loss of self. And this would be a goal, right? To be able to separate thoughts from feelings. And oftentimes when we respond, this is a little analogy I'll give with clients. We want to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. A thermostat responds to the temperature and will either make it cooler or hotter based on your settings, right? Whereas a thermometer just reads the temperature. There's a quick reaction. There's a fast read. And oftentimes we get caught up in reacting, right? Like we are reacting to a situation instead of responding to the situation. A lot of us have grown up in homes where things were very reactionary. There wasn't a lot of separation of thoughts from feelings. Sometimes in unhealthy situations, there's no where do I end and you begin. It's like there's so much confusion, right? And so trying to help clients figure that out is important. We want to have balance of the two forces, the need for togetherness and the need for autonomy. I'm not from Southern California. However, I came down here for college and then I stayed down in Southern California. And my parents, I remember them saying, it's hard for us to let you go, obviously. Like, we never thought you would end up living in Southern California, but like, we also raised you to be an independent adult. And so, although it's hard, it's exactly how we wanted you to be. We wanted you to be independent. We wanted you to be able to figure out things on your own. So, as hard as it is, we do want our kids to be autonomous in theory. We do want them to be independent. We do want them to be able to make their own decisions. Even though we love them and care for them and want them around, we want them to do what's best for them once they get into adulthood. Differentiated people are better able to handle ups and downs of intimacy. So the genogram, we've learned about this from your paper. So this is an assessment, it's an instrument, it's an intervention. This is something you could do with clients in session. I've done it with clients in session. I feel like it's very powerful and very eye-opening. It's just a really great way to identify patterns in family. Sometimes it's hard to articulate them, again, because of the example I gave with the fishbowl. But I do think it's a way for clients to see the patterns, especially when they're just not aware of just what they've been experiencing. But as you've been hearing it, you're like, well, there's some things going on here. Sometimes we can notice things about clients before they can notice them about themselves. That's part of the journey of therapy. However, you could use a genogram in a family session. You could use it in an individual session. You could use it with a couple, because that can even demonstrate, when we talked about, sometimes people have a hard time with intimacy based on their experiences, being able to show a couple like, look, this is where you both come from. This is why you're struggling. That's huge. That's really huge and helpful. So we have Bowen, the Center for Family Learning. There's a lot of different people that contribute this. So it's a process-oriented therapy, relies on self of the therapist level of differentiation, right? Does not emphasize techniques and intervention, uses insight and therapeutic relationship to increase clients' level of differentiation, to try to find that level. So the emotional being of the therapist, right? The level of differentiation and emotional being central to change the process. Believe clients can only differentiate as much as the therapist has differentiated. So no pressure, right? A non-anxious presence, emotionally engaged stance that is non-reactive, right? So you're not, not flat affect, but you're not emotionally responding to something. Probably pretty consistent, pretty level-headed, and it doesn't take things personal, because you're so aware of your own role. Okay. Which is great, right? You're aware that the client is the client, and you're in your role as a clinician, and you don't need to take it personally what they're saying, because you're beyond that, right? You're separate from self, from other, thought from feeling. You're modeling really for them, and creating a safe space for them to process what they're processing. And as they're navigating their own way of trying to differentiate, they're in an environment where they're seeing it being set as an example. Okay. Family's emotional process views as an extension of cellular differentiation process. A family lacking differentiation may become emotionally fused, right? So where do I end? You begin. We're all intricate, the kind of what we talked about before with enmeshment, we're tight knit, we can't separate, we can't be independent, everything is dependent upon one another. It's really just not good. Therapists focus on the family's unique emotional system, not on environment or culture. And the system has significant impact on each person's behavior, emotions, and symptoms. And as we know, if you live with any people, it's really hard to not be affected by the other people that you live with. How much we allow that to affect us, that's where we have choice, right? And we can try really hard, but it is really hard to not be affected by the people that we live with. Biological phenomenon that is present in all natural systems, automatic physical and emotional reactions not mediated through conscious logical processes. Families exhibit chronic anxiety in response to crises, loss, conflict, and difficulties. Okay. Differentiation creates clear-headedness, allowing for reduction in reactivity and anxiety, right? Because we're separating thought from feeling. You can have a thought and you can have a feeling, but they don't need to be interconnected, or only emotion is overruling. We're not having any sort of logic. That heart-head connection is in a healthier place, where we're not leading all with one or leading all with the other. And when we tend to be really emotional about everything, that's where we get that reactivity, right? That's that knee jerk. That's that reaction we get in the pediatrician's office when the knee gets tapped, right? It's that kick. But oftentimes when those things happen, we have a lot of regret and we're apologizing a lot, right? Whereas with this modality, with what we're trying to do is we're going to have less of those. We're reading the room. We're trying to assess, maybe taking a breath, taking a step back. That's what we're trying to do. Okay. Emotional processes from prior generations are present and alive in current family emotional system. Children may emerge with higher, equal, or lower levels of differentiation than parents. Severe emotional problems, result from level of differentiation becoming lower with each generation. So as the patterns have continued, in a sense, it's gotten sicker, potentially. And so, and we, unfortunately, we see that in families. If we look at our relatives or we look at other people's families, we can see the pattern of degeneration, where it's just gotten worse and worse and worse because it's just manifesting itself maybe in a more intense way, or the problems are getting more severe, things of that nature, which isn't great. So the genogram, like we said, it can be used for depression, substance use, conflict, abuse, roles and systems. And then trying to figure out the patterns that we see, right? Differentiation scale ranges from 1 to 100. Bowen maintained people rarely reach higher than 70. It's kind of like that self-actualization, like who gets there? I don't really know. Triangulated people, right? Like, so you could have, in a family especially, you may see this, you might have one child and one parent on one side, and then the other parent is left out, or you could have the kids and one parent. So it's important to assess the triangles because they could be one of the big hindrances, right, in a family changing. The third person is used to alleviate tension. The more clients attempt to change a relationship with a third entity, the more they reinforce the aspects they want to change in the relationship. Okay. So the family projection process. So process in which parents project immaturity onto one or more of their children. Causes decreased differentiation, right? Because we're projecting. Common pattern is for a mother to project her anxiety onto her child. I see this often in therapy. Focuses all her attention on this child to soothe her anxiety. I think parents often put their fears for their children on their children, and then the children are held to this, I don't want to say this standard, but like this perception that isn't accurate of them, which either sets them up sometimes for failure or just really limits them. And then there's conflict because, like, I'm not doing those things. I've seen this in situations where family members have taken in maybe a child that they've raised, and maybe that child came from an addiction background as far as their parents. And they're raising the child and they're so fearful the child will become like their parents. They're constantly on them, like worried. Like if I'm so strict, if I'm doing this or I'm doing that, you're not going to be like your mom. You're not going to be like this person. But in that, it's kind of recreating the same thing. And that's really scary, right? And it's not fair to the kid because they're like, I'm not that person, but you're like almost like making me that person. It's just this weird dynamic, not super healthy and not super helpful. And so an emotional cutoff occurs when a person no longer emotionally engages with another in order to manage anxiety. So it can take form of no longer speaking to other person. Client may believe cutoff is a sign of mental health. Client reports cutoff helps manage emotional reactivity. Now, I'm not saying space from people isn't good. Sometimes we have to create boundaries with toxic people in our lives. But I think also too, there's a place where we can come to where we just accept someone for who they are, and based on who they are and their limitations, we don't expect things more than what they can offer. And I think when we come to that place in a family, we're able maybe to be around people assuming they're safe, like they're not going to harm you or abuse you or things like that. But just know, like, you can't disappoint me because I already know you're disappointing. So I'm not going to ask you to do something I just truly know you're not capable of. And that's just who you are. And it's a bummer, but I'm not going to ask you for something you can't give me, you know? And that's like a really hard place to come to, especially when it's a parent or someone who's had a significant role in your life. That's a really hard place to come to. But I think the sooner we come to that place, the better and healthier we will be. Okay. Sibling position, older children, responsibility and authority, later born children, underdogs, question status quo, youngest child avoids responsibility in favor of freedom. I truly believe in birth order, as I have 5 kids in my house and I see it unfold often in the way the kids behave. Um, and it is interesting. Like my middle son, I have five, so I have a few middles. He is a riot, and he challenges, and he does a lot of things that I'm like, oh my gosh, you are such a middle. There's a great book I read. There's the birth order book, great book to read. I read a book on like dealing with middle children because I was so concerned about my second oldest son, thinking he was going to be the middle, not realizing I was going to have, five. There's even things with like gender. Like I have four boys, one girl. My daughter's the youngest, so it's kind of unique. Not only is she the youngest, but she is the only of her gender. So there's something with birth order in that. There's a lot of factors that affect birth order, death, big age gaps, things of that nature. So if you ever are interested in reading about that, that is interesting because I do think it plays a role in family dynamics, how people behave, how children behave. It's very interesting how that affects family dynamics. And you could be like, we raised all our kids the same, but all of them are so different. Well, one, of course, they have different personalities, different strengths, different growing areas. But I do think birth order plays a role. How we could have a situation happen, all my kids are there, and how each one of them interpret it would be very different. Very, very different. So I hope this information has been helpful to you and just will get you excited about potentially working with families. The two basic goals is increasing differentiation and decreasing emotional reactivity that results in chronic anxiety. As we can imagine, in any family, all families probably want that. I know there's times in my family as a parent, like I wish I wasn't so reactive or overly anxious or worried about things. There's a lot of pressure on families, especially today, to be busy and all these things. And busyness isn't like doesn't make you successful. It just makes you busy. And so, I think all families could benefit from some of this, but you could see how a family that is really struggling, being able to decrease emotional reactivity would make a big change, because there's probably a lot of regret, maybe even some shame and some disengagement from one another as a result of like hurt. And so as therapists, we get the blessing to come alongside our clients and work through some of that and maybe identify some patterns. Maybe our clients are doing the best with what they've been given due to how their families were. And that's not to cause or throw shade at whoever their parents were. It's like maybe your parents were doing the best they could based on what they were given. As you go back generations and generations, there's even circumstances that have happened in a culture. I know this isn't honing in on culture, but just think of the Great Depression and how people were raised during that time. And then, when I think of my great grandfather, he was like melting soap together to make a bar, even though he could afford a bar of soap. It was just like this fear, right? This anxiousness. And that kind of stuff like trickles down, we've lived through a pandemic. I don't know how that's going to affect our future children, right? We have all the internet and all this technology and how that's affected our culture and how that affects parenting and how that affects anxiety and access and all these things. And so it's interesting how some stuff in our world shifts and changes, how that affects the family and what's expected of the family, and then the pressure that's on the family. So anyways, I hope you all have a great week. We are halfway done, which is probably hard to believe. Keep up your hard work. I'm looking forward to reading all of your Genogram papers. And I know it's very personal information, so I don't take it lightly what you're writing. But I'm thankful for you participating in that, and sorry for any confusion that may have been had. I hope you have a great week.